Hi everybody and welcome back again to SQL in the City Streamed, back live again where it is still snowing in Cambridge. I'm beginning to get a little bit worried. I'm thinking I might be trapped in the building here all night. But hey, we could have a streamed event that lasts 24 hours. Who's up for that? You guys? Oh, there's not so much support here. I'll be here. Anyway, today I want to speak to you about best practices for getting started with database versioning and automation. Now, those of you that have attended previous SQL in the City streamed events will have seen me talk around this topic before, wrapped up in what we might call database DevOps. So to get us all on the same page and to set the scene a little bit, let me introduce myself and a little bit of background to the topic. So my name's Tom Austin. I'm Head of Pre-Sales Engineering here at Redgate Software, focusing on the EMEA and APAC regions. I've been at Redgate for around about 10 years now. And during that time, I've pretty much exclusively focused on our database change management tooling. So helping our customers to deliver changes from their development environments all the way through to production in the most effective and efficient way. Now, along the way, of course, we've introduced new tools and new components as new processes became apparent within the world that we live in. So automation became a big thing, and we moved on from just automating SQL Compare to introducing things like DLM automation and ready-roll technology as part of that. Now, what I want to share with you, I guess, today is some of my experiences of working with customers who have been through this process, as well as some of the findings that we can take from the reports that we often refer to show us what's going on out there in the world with regard to DevOps and specifically database DevOps. So first of all, let's define what we mean by DevOps. Now, those of you who've watched me before, you'll know that I lean towards Donovan Brown, Principal DevOps Program Manager at Microsoft, his definition of DevOps, which is DevOps is the union of people, process, and products to enable continuous delivery of value to end users. A week ago, I hosted a special guest for one of the webinars that we put out, Abel Wang, who's one of Donovan's team, and he gave a great presentation around how you can kind of go from nothing to a full DevOps pipeline using some of the features and functionality in VSTS and TFS as well. But both of those guys will tell you that you can't do DevOps without all three of these pieces coming together: people, process, and product. Now, of course, from a Redgate point of view, we are focused largely towards the database side of things. And actually, when we look at the three components that we bring together to deliver DevOps, we're mainly focusing around product and process because, you know, we're a tools provider. We're a vendor of tools which allow you to adopt certain processes and practices. And actually, by having the right tooling to make the adoption of those processes easier, it can actually help to bring those people on board and set that right culture tone for the enablement of DevOps within your organization. Now, the title for my presentation today is a very specific area of database DevOps. Here we're talking about versioning and automation. So on the diagram that you can see on your screens at the moment, you'll see we're really talking about the blue shaded area here. So everything round from development in the kind of bottom corner all the way round to release at the top. Now, Redgate, of course, provide tools in these other areas, but these are not really what I'm going to be focusing on today. So if we now know what we mean by DevOps, we're all on the same page, we're all agreed, well, Donovan, Abel, and I am at least. If you go to different DevOps presentations, everybody has a slightly different definition, but it's usually around those core three values. Why is it of interest to us? Why is everybody trying to define it? Why is everybody speaking about it? What is the big thing? Well, we've seen time and time again the value that is actually returned to organizations who are able to adopt these practices and approaches and perform well against their business objectives. So here, as an example, these are some of my favorite statistics from the 2017 State of DevOps report produced by Dora and Puppet Labs. And you know, these need no explanation, really. 440 times faster lead times, that's enormous. 96 times faster recovery from failures. I mean, this is impressive. My favorite one, though, is the top headline one there, 46 times more frequent deployments. That means that people who are in this kind of sweet spot of being able to deliver 46 times more frequent deployments get that many more turns at getting it right. Where your competitor just gets one version of their software out to their customers, you've got 46 times that number out in front of your customers, and so you can gather 46 times more feedback. So there's obvious business benefits to adopting this approach. But I want to talk to you today about a change that I have seen. So I've been introducing DevOps and database DevOps specifically for at least the last 18 months on these streamed events. But actually, there's been a change, there's been a shift, and I'm delighted that this shift has occurred. And what really showed me this was the truth, I mean, I saw some kind of highlights of it early on, but the 2018 State of Database DevOps report has really confirmed it for me. So what is that change? The change is that actually organizations have now decided that they will adopt DevOps. On the whole, everybody's on board. Everybody's thinking this is the way we're going to go. So here you can see over 50% now of people have already got some adoption in place. So 13% already adopted across all projects, 39% already adopted across some of their projects. And actually this report compared to last year's report shows a significant decrease in the number of people who have no plans to adopt it. So it is happening. So that's great news. Alongside this, we've still got the knowledge that actually there's a huge chunk of people who are working across both the application and the database. This figure actually increased. So 76% of people here have people in their teams, developers in their teams that work across both the application and the database. This is up from last year. So more people are touching the database, more people are decided to do DevOps. This is great news too. The turning point really comes here in this final slide for me. Now, if we look at the results here compared to last year, what we can see is that there's a decrease in the number of people who are citing one of the main obstacles as being a lack of support from executive leadership, and an increase in people citing one of the biggest blockers being a lack of appropriate skills in the team. So here it is. This is the change. Last year it was all about, shall we do it? Is it a good idea? Are we just getting involved in something that's all hype? This year it is, we're doing it, but how do we do it? Where do we start? We don't have the skills. We know we want to, but what do we need to actually make this a reality? And what better way could I kind of help with this than to share with you some of the advances that we've made in some of the Redgate tools that allow you to adopt these best practices for getting started with database versioning and automation without you even really having to think about it. So just as a reminder, the main areas that we're talking about here is we have developers who are working on source code, which is going to be checked into source control typically within organizations these days. This is commonplace in the application world. That commit to source control is going to trigger an automated build process, which is going to validate and test our code before producing a package or some kind of artifact that we can use for release management. And that artifact then gets passed over to our release management tool, and we're then able to deploy the latest version of our code out to our various different environments, so testing, QA, staging, and ultimately through to production. Now, from a database point of view, we want to do exactly the same thing. So we're going to take all of those stages, source control, continuous integration, and release management, and apply exactly the same principles, and where possible, use exactly the same tooling to orchestrate this process, but for the database, so that we can have our database alongside the application. So with that in mind, let's jump on into Visual Studio and start looking at how we can set this up really quite simply and straightforward. So you can now see my desktop on the screen. I'm just going to open Visual Studio and first of all show you the databases that I'm going to be working with today. So over here in the SQL Server Object Explorer, you'll see I have these two databases, Redgate Publishing and Redgate Publishing _dev. And I'm going to use these to simulate my production database and my development database. So Redgate Publishing being production, Redgate Publishing _dev being my development database. No prizes for working that out for yourselves. Now, I've also already set up a team project, which we can see is empty. So if we come over here and look at the code in this repository, there's nothing there, it's entirely empty. So essentially we're going to take these databases as our starting point and create a brand new project within Visual Studio using some of the technology available within the Redgate SQL toolbelt so that we can actually capture change to our database over time. On top of that, I'm then going to use TFS, or it could be VSTS if we wanted to, but in this case I'm using TFS, to build an automated build process which produces an artifact, which I'm also going to pass over to an automated release pipeline that we're all going to configure in the next 19 minutes and 25 seconds. So fingers crossed, here we go. So heading back on into Visual Studio, the first thing I'm going to do is click this Create Project button. And this is going to give me a whole bunch of different project types as usual, but because we've installed the Redgate SQL toolbelt, you'll see we have this new project type available to us, and that's the ReadyRoll SQL Server Database project type. And so this is the type that I'm going to select, and I'm going to give this project a name. In this case, let's do something creative like Redgate Publishing. There we go. And then I'm just going to choose to add this to source control. So if I click OK, this is going to create for me that project within my solution. And where this changes compared to previous versions of this tool that you may have used is we'll now launch this special project wizard. And this is where we are kind of embracing that shift in the results that we've seen out there in the market, where people now know that it's a good idea to do database DevOps, but they need help getting started. And so actually this wizard takes a lot of the pain out of getting up and running with database DevOps using the SQL toolbelt. So I'm going to click on Get Started, and what it's going to ask me for, first of all, is for me to specify a couple of database connections. So on the left-hand side of the screen here, you'll see it's asking me to specify a development database, and then on the right-hand side of the screen, it's asking me to specify a deployment target. Now, this is just a sample deployment target, if you like, because later on, if I want to, I can go back into the settings and I can define other targets that we wish to deploy to as part of the deployment process. But to get us started, to set a reference point, if you like, of what the current state of our target environments are, I can specify a database here right at the very beginning. In terms of development databases, you'll see not only can I specify a connection, but I have another option here to create a new database. And so if actually all we've got currently is our production database, then we can use this to actually create a fresh copy of that database, perhaps on our local server or using LocalDB, that we can use as a development database so that we're not making our changes directly on production. I'm sure nobody's still doing that. So let's set this up. So I'm going to specify, first of all, my development database connection. I'm going to browse to my local SQL Server instance and then select that Redgate Publishing _dev database. And then for my target, I'm going to specify that connection. Again, browse to my local SQL Server instance on this VM, my Win 2016 instance, and then select my Redgate Publishing database as the target. And click OK. OK, so I've specified here just those two databases, one which is going to act as my development environment, one which is going to act as my suggested deployment target, my reference point that I'm going to use to produce some artifacts later on. So let's click Next, and the wizard's going to tell us exactly what it's going to do. So it's going to produce for us a fresh baseline that it's going to add to our project in the Solution Explorer, and we'll see that in a moment. And that process consists of actually creating a baseline script which represents that current state of the target environment that we're deploying to, and then setting some of the configuration options and basically getting our ReadyRoll project ready to deploy to that database. So let's click Create Baseline and then see what happens here in our Solution Explorer. So I'm just going to confirm that we're adding this to our source control location, and you'll now see in the ReadyRoll window at the bottom of the screen there, it's going through this process of creating this baseline. And there we go, it's done. So what we have here just slide this over, we take a look in our Solution Explorer, is underneath that migrations folder that we had when we first kind of added this project. It's created for us two subfolders. The first one, it's called 1.00-baseline, and the second one is 110-changes. And this is one of the features that has always been available in ReadyRoll, but perhaps has been more difficult for some of our users to find. And this is an ability to separate out changes and baselines via this folder structure that we can put in place. So essentially, this script that's been added to our migrations baseline folder is the indication of the target state that we're ultimately going to deploy to. So if I open up this file, you can see here it has all of the create statements for everything that exists in that target, what we're imagining is our production database. So anything that needs to be added on top of that is now going to be added in these subsequent folders, starting with this 110-changes folder. Now, you can name these folders as you wish. So you could have different folders for different features. You could have different folders for different versions. And what it means is it allows you to kind of isolate units of work within these folders so that you have a collection of migration scripts that run within the folder structure. So, for example, as we add change scripts to our 110 folder here, it will run all of those before moving on to any subsequent folders where we would have a series of migration scripts to deploy further change. So that's one of the core principles taken care of for us. It's set up the baseline so we know the state that we're deploying to. It's set up our folder structure so that we can capture changes in a sensible way as we progress the project forward. The other thing that it's done for us down here is added some files to this folder that we can see here that's termed Schema Model. And this is the offline schema model that's present when using this part of the Redgate SQL toolbelt. And actually what this provides us is a reference point. One of the things that I always hear from people who have used a kind of migrations first approach historically is, yeah, it's great, it gives us control, it gives us flexibility, but how do we see how an object's changed over a period of time? Well, this is how you see how it's changed. This offline schema model captures the exact same stateful representation of those database objects as our SQL source control project would, or perhaps SSDT would. So you look back at the history of these files and see, you know, at this point, what did this table look like? At this point, what did the table look like? And you can compare between these as well. So essentially, you're getting the best of both worlds. So having created this, let's now add it into source control. So I'm going to go to the pending changes tab, and I'm going to add my comment, initial commit, and check this in. So whilst that check-in's happening, let's head back over to TFS. And if I browse to my homepage for this project, you'll see I'm going to be presented with this option right smack bang in the middle of the screen. Use continuous integration. Click here to set up the build. So let's do exactly that. So I'm going to click to set up the build. And now with the list that we have here on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see that I'm able to select a template. So this was one of the other challenges for people who were trying to set this up for the first time. They didn't know what combination of tasks they needed to actually set up an automated build. Well, thankfully now, because I've installed the SQL Toolbelt components and the ReadyRoll extension from the marketplace, I can actually just search this templates list for a ReadyRoll specific template and then choose to add that in. And this gives me exactly the components that I need, the list of tasks that I need to set up the automated build. So first of all, grabbing the sources from the repository, downloading NuGet, download the ReadyRoll build components in case we don't already have those available. And there's a few tweaks that I need to make here. So first of all, I'm going to tell it which agent to use. So it's going to use the default agent queue. And then I get to specify my target database. So I'm going to specify that Redgate publishing database on my local instance. And this is going to be used as that reference point so that when we produce things like diff reports, when we produce things like drift reports, this is what it's going to use to calculate those. Now, you'll see here it's already put together the rest of the task for me. So the build of the solution, the copy of the files, the publish of the artifact, that's all done for me. So all I need to do here is choose save and queue. And so this will go off and start running a build. Now, if I wanted to at this point as well, I could head into the triggers and I could tell it that I want it to be building every time there's a commit to source control. And so just enable that trigger there and save this ready for when we make a change later on. Now, this build is now running and it will be validating that first commit of the files that we've made to our TFS repository. You can see it's running here based upon the initial commit check-in that we made. And once this is completed, we can then use that as the basis for our automated deployment process. So I won't stand here and show you every single step and every single line in the log file of what it's going through. We'll leave that for another day. Instead, what we'll do is we'll actually switch over to our release management tab and start defining that release process so that we can take the artifact that's produced by this automated build and use that to deploy out to our target database, which, as we know, is our Redgate publishing database. So let's head over to release, and now I'm going to choose new definition. And this time I'm going to start with an empty process because I'm only going to add one task. That's all I need, one task to define a ready role deployment. So first of all, I'm going to add an artifact, and the source of that artifact is going to be my CI build, which we just set up. Click add. I'm then going to come over to my target environment. I'm actually going to change this to production because I don't think environment 1 is particularly representative. And I'm going to change the tasks to include that one task that I require, which is my ready role deploy database package task. So I'm going to add this, and you'll see it tells me I need to take care of a few settings. First thing I need to do is point it to the deployment artifact so we can navigate through those files that were produced by the automated build process and choose my deploy package file. And then once again, it asks me to define a target. So let's define that as Redgate publishing. Okay, and save that. Again, if I wanted to, if I was feeling really bold, and actually with the snow outside, I am feeling kind of bold today. So I'm going to head back into my pipeline tab, and I'm going to enable continuous deployment. So every time we get a successful build, this is automatically going to push that change out to our production database. So there we have it. I saved that. That's all we really need to do to get the most basic of automated build and deployment pipelines in place. Now, I could add a whole bunch of extra stuff in here. I could do some automated testing. I could do some data generation. I could do some documentation. All of these things could be added, but actually, given the time, 6 minutes, 45 seconds left, I'm going to move on and make a change and see if we can push this through the pipeline. So let's head back into Visual Studio. I'm going to open up my dev database and look for my contacts table. I'm going to open up the designer for my contacts table. And here you'll see a whole bunch of different columns. Now, I'm going to add a new column to this table. And this new column is going to store Twitter IDs. So let's add Twitter on the end. And let's say this is going to be, I don't know, let's say 30 characters altogether. And I'm going to click the update button and ask it to generate the script for me. And what you'll see is that the ReadyRoll technology intercepts this and grabs that request and automatically creates for me a suggested migration script and adds it into my changes folder that we saw configured for us earlier. So here it has that alter table contacts, add Twitter, and the data type there. Now, of course, the power in this approach is that if I wanted to, I could also say, actually, as part of this deployment, I want to update the contacts table and set the new Twitter column. So update contacts and set the Twitter column as equal to, and then I can do some data operations at the same time. So maybe @ symbol plus and then the contact full name as an example. So let's add this in as part of that deployment, and then we can save this file and commit it to source control. So this is now going to be the code that's actually used come deployment time. So we'll switch over to our Team Explorer, add our comment, added Twitter, and check that in. And so now, if we switch back over to our automated build process, we'll see this gets triggered by that commit to source control. Once that build is successful, it will produce the artifacts that are used by the automated release pipeline. And because we enabled that continuous deployment toggle, it's automatically going to deploy this change out to production for us as well. So we can see already that build's in process based upon that added Twitter commit. And again, we could look in here and see all of the things that are happening as part of this process. But I'll save that for when you download the trial version and have a go at this yourself. But essentially, once that build's succeeded, if we switch over now to our Releases tab, we'll see that it's automatically created for us a release, which we can see here. And if I open up that release, we'll now see that this is already being deployed, the deployment is in progress, to our production environment. And if we open up the logs here, you can see that task is just made up of that one simple job, ready, roll, deploy database. And actually the one thing I will show you here in the output is that the section that's of interest to us is this bit here, where we altered our contacts table. So it picked up on that migration script from our changes folder that needed to be executed in our target database, and that's the migration script that's been executed to actually carry out that deployment. So let's prove that that's happened. So I'll switch back over into the Object Explorer within Visual Studio. Let's go up to our Redgate publishing database. That was our target, remember? And let's take a look at the data that's now in our contacts table. And if we scroll across here, we'll now see we've got a new Twitter column, and it's also populated that column with the contact full name and that @ symbol at the start. So there we go. In less than 20 minutes, we've been able to get our database under source control. We've got that offline schema model that allows us to look back historically at the state of the various different objects over time. And we've set up an automated build and automated deployment pipeline. Now, as I said, there's much more that we could do to extend that. So we could continue to add additional bits and pieces into this process. But actually, in terms of the core requirements, that was pretty straightforward and pretty easy. So you do have the people within your team who have the skills to do this, because you've just seen exactly how easy it can be. So back to our slides quickly. What I would encourage you to do, if you haven't done so already, is really to take a look at our Database DevOps Maturity Assessment. So through the process of conducting this research that I spoke about that produced the 2018 and 2017 State of Database DevOps report, we engaged with hundreds of different customers of ours that have all sorts of different setups, all sorts of different problems from all sorts of different industries, large companies, small companies. And we learned a great deal from working with all of these different organizations and how they're able to succeed. And from that, we can kind of benchmark what the common characteristics are where we see a greater level of success within organizations who are adopting these types of practices and processes. So if you want to evaluate your processes and see where you are on that scale and actually see how you can take the next steps towards implementing database DevOps, then head on here, redgate.com/maturity assessment, and take that assessment, and we'll send you a full report with all of our recommendations based upon our experience afterwards. So I am just about out of time today, so thank you so much for listening to me. I really appreciate the opportunity to share with you how easy it can be to get started with database DevOps. If you'd like to find out more, head on over to redgate.com/DevOps, or you can contact me or my team at databasedevops@red-gate.com. Finally, don't forget, get involved at the Redgate Hub, redgate.com/hub. Thanks everybody for watching. Take care. Enjoy the rest of SQL in the City streamed. And hopefully I'll get home tonight. Who knows? Thank you.